Welcome to iBest English Centre, free online IELTS lessons. In today's lesson, we're going to look at a common topic in IELTS Speaking Part 1, and that's the topic of housework. But before we begin, let's quickly review what Speaking Part 1 is. In this part of the test, you will have an interview with the examiner. It will last 4 to 5 minutes, and the examiner will ask you questions about familiar topics. I'm actually going to be focusing today's lesson on just one question. We're going to have a look at how many students answer this question and how we can improve their answer to get a better band score. So the question we're going to look at today is, who usually does the housework in your home? A common answer that many students give is the following. My mother usually does the housework. She likes cooking and cleaning. So what's actually wrong with this answer? Well, it is actually grammatically correct. So let's have a look at the problems. Firstly, the actual vocabulary given in the answer is not very good. It's quite low level. Secondly, it doesn't give a good range of adverbs of frequency. This question did include an adverb of frequency, usually. Who usually does the housework in your home? In the answer that the student gave, they actually repeated the adverb of frequency which the examiner used. So this doesn't give the examiner a good range. Another problem, it actually repeats the question. This isn't a natural way of talking. And the final point is the grammar. Of course, they're both two simple sentence structures, so the grammar is very limited. There are quite a few things we can do to improve this answer, and we're going to start by looking at vocabulary. Of course, in the answer, the vocabulary was quite low level. So let's have a look at some of the common vocabulary that the examiner hears so often. Cleaning the house, cooking, washing up. We need to give the examiner a better range of vocabulary than this if you're going to get a band score 6 or above. Here's some less common vocabulary for those higher band scores. Dusting, doing the dusting, sweeping the floor, scrubbing the floor, ironing, doing the ironing. Now let's look at some adverbs of frequency. You need to remember that when the examiner asks a question, many of the questions do have a language function attached to the question. What I mean is, the examiner is testing your grammar. And in this question, he's testing your adverbs of frequency. Who usually does the housework in your home? Now, a lot of the students just use the normal, common adverbs of frequency, which is fine, it is grammatically correct, but it certainly is not going to help you get a higher band score. So, here are the common ones. Always, usually, often, sometimes, never. So let's look at some less common ones for the higher band scores. Most days, as often as I can, whenever I get the chance, almost every day, pretty much every day, from time to time, once or twice a month, on rare occasions, hardly ever, almost never. We also have to look at how to answer directly, and that means not repeating the question. Many students repeat the question because they're a little bit nervous or they think that that is what is required in a speaking test. But actually IELTS speaking is a test of using English very naturally. So let's have a look at how to answer directly and not repeat the question. Who usually does the housework in your home? To be honest, my mother does. Actually, I do. My mother does. Oh, I do. Another aspect of answering well in IELTS is to use complex structures. So let's take everything that we've learnt so far. Let's take the vocabulary, the range of phrases for frequency, and let's answer directly and naturally. And let's put all of that into a complex answer. Who usually does the housework in your home? My mother. I really hate scrubbing floors and things like that, so I'm afraid I almost never do any housework. Actually, I do. Pretty much every day I have to dust the rooms, sweep the floors and do the ironing, as my mother is almost never at home because of her work. I don't mind too much, I suppose. Well, to be honest, it's my mother, as I hardly ever have time to do the ironing or things like that. Do you feel that some of those answers that we gave as a model are too short? Well, to be honest, they're fine. The question was a very simple question. Who usually does the housework in your home? It does not require a long answer to answer this question. So having just one or two sentences is absolutely fine, but the sentence or sentences that you do use must be packed full of language. So let's have a look at some tips for speaking part 1. Firstly, don't repeat the question. IELTS is testing your natural ability to speak English. This is not an academic speaking test. It is a normal speaking test. Therefore, speak naturally and answer directly. Secondly, listen to the question. If you hear an adverb of frequency in the question, you know that that is one of the language functions of the question. So, in your answer, make sure you use a different adverb of frequency, or for the higher band scores, use different phrases relating to frequency. Another point to think about is the vocabulary. If you want to get a band score 6 or above, you do need to give the examiner a range of interesting vocabulary. Now, before the examiner starts asking you questions, he will introduce the topic. For example, let's talk about housework. The moment you hear the topic, you need to think of all the vocabulary that you would like to give the examiner while he's asking these questions. So listen carefully, plan the vocabulary you're going to give, and make sure it's a good range. And lastly, grammar. You need to make complex structures if you're going to aim for band score 6 or above. And one way to do this is to use clauses or to link your ideas together. For example, as, because, so. If you look back at some of the model answers I gave, you will see that I've used complex structures and I've created them by using these linkers. So go back when you finish this lesson and have a look. Now, before we end the lesson, I'd like to tell you something very important. IELTS is a language test. It is not a memory test. So, while it's good to practice techniques of how to impress the examiner, it's very important that you do not memorize your answers. You cannot plan and memorize sentences and then repeat them in your exam. IELTS does not accept memorized language. So what you need to do is plan ideas for topics and nothing more. Your answers in the test must be natural. So, the biggest tip? Speak naturally, and you'll do better.